Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
It's me, Egbert, once again. I'm the new owner of this station. I went out and hired the best talk radio consultant, Jeff Allen from News Talk STL, and told him to hire the worst talent he could find. Jeff did exactly as I told him. Ladies and gentlemen, here are Brad and John.
John, I went over that last break, and I understand that violated a law in Washington, Missouri, and now I didn't go to court. Court was at 6:45 this morning. I missed court. So now there's an FTA warrant for me, and I have to be really careful today. So bear with me, okay?
I will, and get those 4 Quaaludes out of your pocket, Brad, because it's 1979, and you're trying to numb your pain.
Once again, another movie. See, I'm not a movie guy. There's all sorts of movies I've never seen. Have you ever seen the movie Wolf of Wall Street?
I have seen that movie, yeah. Some fantastic visuals in that movie.
And you know the Quaalude references right then, right? That's how they live their life on Quaaludes.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that's a whole other story. Okay, 2 things. Briefly mention one, and then I want to do a little bit in depth on something. I'm going to tell you something that you're not going to believe that I heard on NPR yesterday, okay? Number 1 is Nikki Haley came out and said pretty much exactly what I said, I guess on Monday morning, that if Trump's going to win, shut up about all this crazy crap he keeps bringing up. I told the thing that I heard this thing over the weekend with Eric Erickson, and he just ran down the points. Every day he should say $2.38. Why is that number important? That was how much gas costs on my last day of presidency. He's going through all this thing. There were no wars when I was president. There were no problems in the Middle East. There were no problems in Ukraine. There were no problems. We didn't have a problem at the border. The border was in check. Just go check, 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 check. Every single damn day say the same stuff. Now, the thing that's come out now is that people are, and even to the point where Nikki Haley says, stop talking about the fact that Kamala Harris, won't be interviewed, and she just says, leave it alone. Now, and the last time I say this, I'm going to say this, and then I'll move on. Okay, the press is. I got into an argument with a friend of mine yesterday over this. That her response is, why should Kamala talk to the press? Why should she even why is it a big deal that she has, and I'm going like, okay, once again, don't you want to know, if you're voting for someone, don't you want to know about that person? Don't you want to know how they stand on this? And purposely, both her and Tim Walz are not discussing any of their positions, purposely, because once again, if they do, they're going to get themselves in trouble because Kamala's come out and said she's against fracking, and once again, she needs to, get Pennsylvania. Now she comes out, she's for fracking. Trump comes out 2 months ago and says no tips. Kamala comes out and says no tips. Okay, so here's my solution. But the press is a bunch of wussies who will never do this. And I told you the fact that one of her spokespersons, I think we talked about this yesterday, one of her spokespersons came out and said, well, the reason we're not going to the press is because we don't want to have our message somehow subverted, so we're going to go directly to the population, and we're going to put our message across on TikTok and Instagram. So if I were in the press, this is my solution. I would say, okay, fine, 2 can play that game. Guess what? We're not going to follow you anymore. We're not, there's not going to be the gaggle of press following you around, Kamala and Tim. Good luck. We're just going to stay at home, and we're just going to sit in our computer terminals, in our newsrooms, or in our, homes, wherever we work out of, and we're just going to say, well, Kamala doesn't want to talk with us, so we don't want to talk with her. And you talk about the Harris campaign doing a 180, like the brakes come on and they pull the parking brake and they do the smuggler's turn. They would turn on a dime and say, well, now hold on a minute now.
You're right, Brad.
We don't want that, because what they're doing is they're managing the press. Exactly what John Combest used to get paid to do. You manage the press is what you did, correct? That was,
and there's a penalty to pay if you say we're not going to talk to you guys.
Right. But once again, the press is a bunch of wussies, and if they were smart, they would all, and for example, like the deal with KJP, you ask her no questions. Well, all of a sudden, one morning you show up, and KJP goes up in front of the podium, and there's nobody in the press room, and she's going like, "Where's everybody at?" Well, we ask these questions, you never get us answers. We're gonna play golf. Normally we'd be in the press room for 2 hours with you. We're gonna go play golf, or we're gonna go down to the Starbucks, and we're all gonna have a round of cafe au lait or whatever they drink at Starbucks. I don't know. I mean, who knows? Okay. Second thing, I'm listening to NPR yesterday. After I get off the air, my usual routine, we end at 8. I chop up the show. I usually get it done by 8:30, and I go out. And my routine is because I don't eat anything before I go on the air, I go and I grab a donut somewhere at Schnucks or something like that. I was running a bit late yesterday. So a little bit after 9 o'clock, I'm in the car, and they have this thing called, and it's from WAMU. It's on the NPR network, and it's called 1A. Are you familiar with 1A?
No, but you've talked about it several times on the show, yeah, and that's from American University, right?
Yes, American University, the WAMU. That's what the call letters are. American University, AMU. Okay, the topic yesterday was disco. Okay, are you ready for this? Now,
I'm ready.
This predates you a little bit. I heard the most amazing things about disco, and once again, we have a woman professor from Miami University in Ohio, who's giving this historical aspect of disco, and she keeps talking about the fact that disco has been marginalized by the white people, and it's been I swear to God, it's been misappropriated from the blacks. That disco started out, and if you know the not rap but disco, if you know the roots of disco, yes, it for the most part was started by black musicians, and probably some of the most famous ones are, if you know who Niles Rodgers is, does that name ring a bell?
No.
He is still active in the music industry. He's got to be like 80 or something like that now. He's a famous musician, and he was one of the guys that put together this group called Chic. Good times, boom, 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 boom,
yeah,
boom,
I
boom,
know
boom,
Chic,
boom.
yeah.
Okay, that's Nile Rodgers, and he was a bass player. Okay, so they're saying that what happened with disco music, it originally was black music. It was black dance music, and the white folks, they misappropriated it. And they specifically, get this professor, she draws a line directly between how black music was misappropriated by the white guys and was used to promote white musicians. And her example was the label that was the big disco label back in the day was Casablanca Records, okay? And her point was they took all that money from all the black musicians that were famous for disco music, and they promoted, guess what group that was on Casablanca? If I gave you 100 guesses.
Bee Gees. The
no,
Bee Gees.
you would never. No. It's something that was not necessarily disco. You would never guess this. I'll give you.
I have no idea.
I'll give you a clue. 4 guys in makeup. Okay. Are you?
Yes.
What's that?
Is it Kiss?
Yes. Then she said,
No way,
yes,
really?
Yes, Kiss was on Casablanca when they started out. And she said that the profits that they made off the black musicians went to fund the contract for Kiss. And I'm going like,
well, that's a pretty good, I mean, society was better off for that, right? Like, we're better off with Kiss than promoting some, I don't know, Detroit garage band.
It gets better. Okay, she also says the disco was the tool for promoting the single white man. And she gives the example of, I'm driving along thinking to myself, have I just taken some ecstasy? Am I really listening to this woman talking about this crazy, weird stuff about disco? She talks about that the perfect example of this was disco through this movie Saturday Night Fever, and John Travolta promoted the image of the dude who was the stud muffin, who was, going out on the dance floor and attracting all the women, and then betting all the women because he was the dude, and that's what he did. He was a single white man, and his life revolved around disco, and that was his life. And the interesting part of this is that I have a friend of mine back in the day that used to always say, and if you know the history of this, This was 1977. I think Saturday Night Fever was out. Okay, disco was hot from 77 up until about like 80 or 81, and then all of a sudden it changed. Why was that? Do you know the reason for that, John?
I don't have any idea.
Because the next big movie that John Travolta was in was Urban Cowboy. So he went from being Joe Disco to Joe Cowboy, and then it changed because once again, where did John Travolta's life revolve around? Going to Gillies in Pasadena, Texas, and riding the bull and doing those two-step routines out on the dance floor. So all of a sudden, people went from wearing the women in their disco outfits and the dudes in their John Travolta kind of outfits. All of a sudden, they're wearing Wranglers and Wrangler pants and Wrangler shirts and Stetson hats, and they're going to a place. Matter of fact, it's gone now, but the hotel out there, which is now, it's been so many things. I don't even know what it is. It's the tall hotel out there in the corner of 70 and Lindbergh. It used to be another hotel, a small hotel. They chopped it down and made a big new one. They had a place there called Cowboy, and the interesting thing was when you went to Cowboy, you had to have on designer jeans. If you were wearing Levi's, you couldn't get in. You had to have designer jeans. So then, wait till I hear this one. Wait till you hear this one. You're not going to believe what she said next. I almost drove off the road. I'm going like, I don't believe it. Does the name Steve Dahl ring a bell to you? Does that name ring a bell?
Yeah. Who is that?
Okay, Steve Dahl. I think he's still in the radio business. Steve Dahl is a very famous Chicago disc jockey, okay? And he's been at a bunch of different radio stations. And back in the day, Steve Dahl worked at The Loop, WLUP, which is gone because the God Squad people bought it, and now it's EMF, and they're playing K-Love. Hey, how you people out there, be a good Christian and send us $20 so we can cross the $1 billion capitalization mark for EMF. Okay, anyway, Steve Dahl, and this is interesting because I worked at KSLQ at the time, been working there since 73 and worked there till 84. Okay, when we went out in this period of time, the late 70s, early 80s, and we went out and we did a promotion, we would have the Keishi people come up that goes, disco sucks, your station is blunk, 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 disco sucks, disco sucks, disco sucks. So it was like we were a threat to the manhood of the Keishi listeners because you guys suck, you're terrible radio station, you play disco music. Okay, so Steve Dahl, once again, same sentiment in Chicago. Steve Dahl decides he's going to have the disco demolition. Are you familiar with this?
This is one of my favorite baseball stories of all time.
Right. So he cuts a deal with the Chicago White Sox. The Chicago White Sox are playing a game, I guess at Comiskey Park?
At the old Comiskey.
At the old Comiskey Park. Okay. So they're playing a doubleheader. And the deal is you got in cheap. I think you got a discount. You might have gotten in free. I don't know. If you brought a disco record with you. So in other words, you came to the ballpark, and between the first and second game, they're going to pile all these disco records up out in center field, and they're going to blow them up. This was the disco demolition thing. Okay, so once again, between the games, Steve Dahl gets out there. The grounds crew is freshening up the infield. Steve Dahl, they have trucks. They dump all this pile of disco records that people brought to the game. They put a charge underneath it, and they blow up the records. The only problem was they put a little bit too much, whatever they use, TNT, dynamite, C4, I don't know, whatever they use, a little bit tannerite, a little bit too much tannerite, and it blew a hole in center field. Am I kidding, John?
That's exactly what happened, yeah.
And they had to cancel the second game because the field wasn't playable. Okay, she said this was the beginning of the alt-right movement. That this was the beginning of
a backlash against black culture and gay culture, because black and gay people just want to have a good time dancing, and this is a right-wing, homophobic, racist act.
You are almost exactly saying what she's saying. She's saying this is the beginning of And once again, what's interesting about this is the beginning of Tracy Ellis's radio station. That if you were to draw a timeline of how Tracy, came up with this station where it's a bunch of super right-wing people complaining about stuff all the time. This guy, this is wrong. We're going to show up at the county council meeting. We're going to give them a piece of our mind. They say that this lady says this is directly attributable to Steve Dowell and the disco demolition in Chicago, which happened, I can't remember, it was back in, 80, 81 or something
79.
Like 79. Okay, so I'm thinking to myself, here's what we need to do. Once a week, we need to bring up a topic, and you and I just need to have fun, and we need to come up with crazy, weird theories, but we won't call them theories. We'll say, well, this is how it came to be that people like Starbucks coffee. And we'll come up with some crazy weird thing about once upon a time there was a guy in San Francisco who wanted to urinate on the sidewalk, and back then he got arrested for that. And then we will take that story and essentially weave that into, and this is how Starbucks began, with a guy trying to urinate on the sidewalk in Seattle. And people go, what? That's no way that happened. But once again, would you in a million years, would you equate the disco demolition to the modern right-wing, ultra-right wingers? Would you ever do that?
Of course not. But it works. And I mean, the other thing is the gal that said this, is she a black woman?
Yes, she was.
Oh, well, then Brad, she has no accountability or responsibility. She can say whatever she wants to, and you can't question her. But then you have to nod your head solemnly and say, oh, yes, first of all, let me acknowledge my white privilege and your experience with intersectionality. I appreciate this. You're probably right. What can I do to amend the wrongs of slave owners?
See, you're making my point. You can take anything and essentially, okay, why is it that Clayton became like the place to live? And we could say, well, that was because of the fact that years ago, and we could come up with these crazy, weird theories, and people go like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense because we made it up. And the crazy thing for me is to the point where once again, what I will never understand, and like she talked about, well, misappropriation of the music. Okay, if the black people have come up with this disco music and it's good, which it was, and everybody adopts it, is that an insult or is that a compliment? To me, it's a compliment. And trust me, there are a lot of black musicians who made a lot of money in the disco era. And matter of fact, I'm going to do my homework, and tomorrow I'm going to give you a little thumbnail sketch of Niles Rodgers, who is still in the record business, and I believe he's a multi-millionaire. So how in the world does his work, how would you consider his work being quote-unquote misappropriated by the white people as being bad when he made a ton of money? It's the same thing with Michael Jackson. It's the same thing with all these different black stars. I mean, like, once again, how is that misappropriation? They've done well, like Nelly, that people, Nelly, they misappropriated his music. No, to a certain extent they did. So what? What do they say? Imitation is the highest form of flattery, or what's the phrase?
Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery.
Exactly. And you see this all the time. It's called benchmarking in industry. If somebody comes out with a hot product, everybody copies it, right? If the car manufacturer, look at the deal, like go back to the situation with the Ford Mustang. Ford Mustang was a groundbreaking car. Everybody copied it. Plymouth had a Barracuda and Chevy had Camaros. I mean, it's the same thing. For years and years and years, nobody could copy the Corvette until Dodge came along and made the Viper. It's the same thing. It's people, wow, we're going to have a powerful car. And what did Chrysler come out and do with the Viper? Well, the Corvette's only got a V8. We're going to put in a V10. So in other words, they're taking a basic concept and they're making it better. Complementary. I mean, it would just be like somebody, if tomorrow morning we turned on Tracy's station, they fired the morning crew and it said they had two dudes on there and they called them CJ, and their web address was cjshow.co, and their YouTube channel was cjshow.video. I'd go, damn, look what we did, John. They copied us, right?
I think, by the way, I thought Casper invented the Viper. I know now that to really get you going and to get us going 5 minutes over time, all I need to say is disco and cultural appropriation, Brad.
John, say goodbye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?